It's about the role of social media platforms. And the question that we are going to address is how can data-reliant platforms act responsibly? I don't understand. What is this? What is okay? So we have 4 panelists. Everyone will present themselves and tell what is their role here, why are they here, and then they will get some questions. Elisabetta, will you start? Hi.
Hi, my name is Elisabetta Biasin. I'm working as legal researcher at the Center for IT and IP Law in Leuven. And my research is focused on privacy and data protection issues concerning the processing of personal data within political campaigning.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Paolo Celotta from IAPI, which is the organization in Europe that has worked, I think, the longest on media literacy.
Hi, my name is Annika Link. I work for the European Digital SME Alliance, and we represent about 30 regional and national SME associations from the ICT sector across Europe.
Hi, I'm Thomas Carret. So I'm a data scientist. I've been working also as a researcher in physics for 7 years, then in data science, and then now I'm an independent researcher on data privacy technologies, working for Sony at the moment.
Hi, my name is Tanya. I'm a researcher in Slovenia. I didn't introduce myself, just realized that. I'm working on policies and regulatory frameworks currently. Otherwise, my background is electrical engineering, and my interest is mainly in cybersecurity and trust. Okay, so let's talk now. When we say data, somehow we immediately think on privacy at the same time. So what I would like to ask you is, how do we ensure data protection on one hand and user protection on the other? Because users want to feel protected, but they don't want to share data. So what are the trade-offs here?
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you want to give a presentation?
Yeah, I prepared a presentation on this. Should I take this?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
yeah. Okay, thank you. So, concerning privacy and data protection within political campaigning, I thought to give a small presentation about the privacy and data protection constraints. So, how does this work?
maybe it doesn't.
Maybe you can stand.
Yeah, it doesn't work, right?
Let's see if it works now.
Maybe. Can I stand? It doesn't work. Yeah? No. Just it's a PDF, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it's not PowerPoint, I think.
Okay.
PDF.
Maybe you can just tell if you need to move.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So, this next slide. So, yes, I just wanted to give a follow-up, on privacy and data protection, let's say, issues. And just preliminary information, and some introduction on the online shift of political campaigning, the context, so ecosystem and platforms, fundamental rights, and what are the current issues on privacy and data protection. Next slide, please. And so yesterday I was taking Big Five, a Big Five test, which is the one that is from Cambridge Analytica. So I wanted to introduce myself before, but then we already did. And as you can see, I have a 44% openness, consciousness, and you have all my percentage about the Big Five. So this is something that user took for the Cambridge Analytica, let's say, test. And I wanted to share with you for to say, oh, this is me. And
So you're agreeable, is that right?
Yeah, I am agreeable. It says so, this test. And I have many interests, including soccer and Milan van Houten, for example, according to Facebook. So this gives an idea of how accurate is Facebook. Next slide, please. Anyway, what we wanted to talk about is this. It's of course, Cambridge Analytica scandals, and so the role of platforms, and what about users, and what are the things at stake. So please, next slide. So actually, what happened is that political campaigning has had a shift from traditional ways of doing to an online shift. So the election have become more and more datafied, and political parties are taking advantage of new techniques in digital campaigning. And also, political parties are targeting individual voters with messages in keeping with their particular interests and values. Next slide, please. And this is something that has some potential pitfalls, something that we already talked about today. And so I wanted to create a focus on micro-targeting and online manipulation. And this is something that has been tackled in the European Union context by the EDPS, for example, the European Data Protection Supervisor. And also, he provided an interesting opinion in 2018 before the European election, and speaking about online manipulation related to the use and misuse of personal data processing. Next slide, please. And so, according to the European Data Protection Supervisor opinion on online manipulation, online manipulation has been depicted as a result of three straight approaches. And so, coming from the data processing of individuals, audience segmentation through profiling, and then micro-targeted. I provided an example also from the ICOS, which is the UK Data Protection Authority, and to give an overview of what is micro-targeting and how a user can be micro-targeted in such contexts. And also other things that have been outlined by the EDPS in 2018 concerns further factors that have quite an impact on this, like the use of big data. This is something that we already spoke about before, and also artificial intelligence has a significant role. We concern also to the use of personal data of persons that share their personal data within platforms. Next slide, please. This is exactly the thing. What is the context? The context, when we're talking about platforms and we are talking about the responsibility and accountability within the platforms, we are talking about an environment which is composed by a variety of people, a variety of stakeholders, from political parties and foundations to data brokers and data analytic companies to social media platforms we are talking about, and also national electoral authorities. Slide, please. So just to give a very, very brief overview, the context is really complex in order to think about data protection and use of personal data. And there are many fundamental rights and values at stake, including privacy and data protection, but also other freedoms, such as the freedom of thought, the freedom of expression and information, the freedom of assembly and association. And there are also other rights concern media pluralism and the freedom of election, which is something that has already been outlined before this morning, so it's quite... And also, there are legal frameworks that are really important to talk about this. They concern data protection rules and principles, but also they apply a variety of other legal frameworks, including audiovisual media rules, electoral regulation, also national level, consumer protection, competition law, and security. And it's something that we talked about today, the fact that there is a variety of rules that in a certain way are intertwined somehow in this complicated context. Just a little focus, we talked about GDPR and the role that GDPR had and has. Of course, GDPR is really important. Privacy and data protection law existed also before GDPR. And in 2019, in the context of, in the early months of 2019, the European Data Protection Board provided a statement of the use of personal data in the course of political campaigns. and refreshed a little bit what is about privacy and data protection. So a key point is that personal data processed when revealed political opinion is a special category of personal data, is a sensitive data. And also another thing that we spoke today, personal data made public are still subject and still protected to your EU data protection law. And then there are transparency and other guarantees that should be applied for this. Next slide, please. And of course, this is something that everyone knows, basic principle of GDPR and Article 5. And there are many principles such as lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, which is also should apply in data protection, processing of personal data within platforms. And also purpose specification, data minimization, data accuracy, storage limitation, data security, which is something that has been currently discussed a lot within privacy and protection. Everyone is quite aware of this. But in next slide, in practice, I wanted to create a parallel between what is written on paper and current scenarios. So I was quite interested in knowing what, for example, the Data Protection Authority in the UK find out about privacy and data protection laws and the data protection issues that political party use of data analytics and micro-targeting have raised. And whereas in the paper we have many interesting principles, in practice, this is from political party side, of course, but it's interesting to see how there is a lack of fair processing information. Political parties do not apply due diligence when they choose their vendors. And also there are third-party online campaigning platforms, and there are advertising models that need more transparency towards the users and towards political advertising. This is something really, next slide please, really important. And also another thing that I wanted to point out here is the Commission guidance of the application of Union data protection law in the electoral context, which outline specific requirements and issues on data protection laws, and provided specific recommendation for every stakeholders within the data protection context in the electoral process. So, for example, here are quite mentioned the appropriate legal basis for processing personal data within social media platforms, and of course purpose limitation, the conduction of privacy data protection impact assessment, and security of processing is also something that should be regarded at, and also technical and greater organizational measures. To wrap up a little bit, next slide. This was a very, very brief outline of what is a really, let's say, wide debate, wide scenario, because we have different kind of regulation that might be interesting to study, and I wanted to provide a focus specifically of privacy and data protection. I gave an overview specifically of what it's about political parties in political campaigns, but also GDPR's and data protection principles should be also regarded as concerns to platforms. Regulating online political micro-targeting, it's a very important topic, and there are few challenges that should be regarded at, because online political micro-targeting as political messages could be balanced against freedom of expression from political parties. And this is something that appears from case law in media law and might be applicable as well in the online context. And also
5, 4, 3.
Okay.
I just finished wrap up.
Okay. And then what we need is, of course, we have rules, but it's really important to have regulatory oversight at EU level and national level on privacy and data protection. And this was, there has been a regulation amending the Euratom regulation that has been an important effort, and also the cooperation on enforcement agency is really strictly important here. Next slide, please. At the national level, we have seen an increasing guidance by data protection authorities. I have listed some. But at the same time, enforcement examples are still a little bit fewer. Let's say the UK Data Protection Authority, which investigated in 2018, and the French one. Next slide, I am finished. And then what I wanted to share about transparency measure on political micro-targeting is what we already shared today, that audiovisual media laws in your member state are 20th century laws somehow. And the code of practice encourage transparency measures in political advertising that really really welcome, but at the same time it's a self-regulatory instrument, and so enforcement still it's something that should be regarded as maybe something more constraining could be a plus. And also a very important thing is the creation of platform ad archives, which is something that might be of interest to develop more on a regulatory level rather than a self-regulatory one. So this is the wrap up of everything. I really tried to be super concise, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. But I'm still confused. So many issues. And Paolo, could you help me? Let's go back and just step by step answer this initial general question. How can data-reliant platforms act responsibly? What is the responsibility of data-reliant platforms? So what are all the actors in this process, and what's their stake in the whole game?
I will rely a bit at this time of the day. Is it on? Yeah. I will just put forward and answer your question a number of issues. I rely on the fact that you imagine that all the intelligent things that are obvious, I'm not saying, I just jumped to conclusions. And so the very concise answer to how the social media can have responsibility, they cannot. Now, I will explain why. I will start, and maybe I could link it to the presentation that has just been given, to come and to anticipate another conclusion. One about regulation. Regulation is necessary, it's not enough. I think we should start to think about the level that will be a bit more efficient, that is debated nowadays also in the States. I will come to that point too. Auto-regulation by definition is useful, but it will never work, because I think that we should not be too naive. We should start from some fixed variable. One fixed variable while we are analyzing the issue of disinformation is that social media are private organizations. Private organization means that they inform money. Their business model is indeed to sell our attention to advertiser in exchange of money. They will never, ever do something for the sake of the public good or in the public interest unless they have a benefit of doing that. It's not a matter of being good or bad. We should also consider, it has been mentioned in the morning, and this is hugely important, the relationship in between communication and power. Think for a moment what Trump would have been without Facebook, or Berlusconi would have been without television. There would be nothing. They would not be politicians. And if it's true for instance, Facebook has contributed to the election of Facebook, to the election of Trump. How can Trump ever refuse a favor to Facebook? I think we should be realistic of what is the issue at stake. And it's not about the risk of democracy. These are things that happened 3 years ago. They've happened already. The other aspect is the magnitude and the importance of the money that we are talking about. Facebook has agreed a couple of months ago to pay $5 billion for infringing privacy to the case linked to the Cambridge Analytica. €5 billion and 5,000 is $1 million. So this is what we are talking about. They are earning €100 million per day. Okay, they have 2 billion customers. So this is the complexity of the issue that we have. We cannot be just saying, okay, they should do something or they will regulate themselves. The other thing is the time aspect that we should talk about. This conversation 3 years ago would have been quite weird because it took us 10 years to understand which was their business model. Come on. This is for free, and we are so slow, and we are so slow in catching up. Obviously, education is by definition, but it's not that people would all of a sudden become, as a piece of magic, intelligent and good voters and good citizens and good parents. Because we increase, as we should indeed, media literacy and the skills that people and I like more to talk about citizens rather than customers, obviously. But call them users, whichever way you want. So this is my first point. I don't know whether the second point I should leave it for later, that is, so what do we do, or I carry on. Your choice.
Now, but together with that, I would like just to share my view. Somehow I feel that regulation is used for aligning the incentives with the sanctions through the players that are included in the game. Am I right? Am I coming close to simplifying this complex scenario? I mean, how much do we have the incentives aligned so that we even proceed with regulation? Users want their, let's say, data protected, but platforms or technical giants want their business models to run. Politicians want voters to be informed, let's call it that way, about the actions taken. Do we have the right incentives in place? Do we have the right sanctions in place? And does regulation help about keeping things together?
No.
Thank you.
Of course not. I mean, of course regulation is necessary and it can contribute. And in fact, social media are more than willing and to welcome regulations these days. If you listen to the statement of Facebook these days, they say, yeah, regulation. It's because they know how to get away with it. They have hundreds of lawyers to protect them. And at the end of the day, they will have to pay a little bit, and it's fine. Of course, regulation, tax, I mean, for God's sakes, they should at least pay their tax on the amount of money that they earn. Don't misunderstand me. For me, the enemy is not social media. But obviously, they also do their own business. Regulation is important, but yeah, you are right in saying that we should focus on which are their benefits. Their benefits, for instance, in cooperation is something that has been mentioned before, is something that is necessary because necessarily we have to cooperate with social media if we want to reach any impact. but we have to be very cautious on how to do it. So which are their benefits? We have done, EAPI has done a number of things with Facebook recently, okay? Why is Facebook want to do something with EAPI? Yeah, we are a small organization, and evidently the benefit is to position themselves as the light, good guys, and working along with social civil society and so forth. Is for marketing purposes, for lobbying reasons, but they talk, for instance, about getting the trust of the consumers. But if you want trust, you have to be honest, and they are not. They cannot be in that sense. Many other issues I would like to talk about. I think that we are many here.
Keep them in your head. We will come again to them later. So it seems like we all need to be educated first properly, so that we feel that we have skin in the game, right? There is something that I will lose. That's the best way of learning sometimes. So what would you say, where the ethics lies the most? At which part? At the side of the users, at the side of the algorithms, at the side of the platforms? Who is to be responsible about what?
First of all, I'm not an expert in actually really defining ethics. I think actually it's not well defined in general. So that means that if you don't define something, nobody can be accountable or responsible for it really in any strict sense of the term. The point is, I agree actually here with Paolo, because the responsibility is really difficult to trace to somebody that is the origin of the problem. Regulations are interesting, but at the same time they are not sufficient, because basically you can't control something that is independently minded. If you have any adolescent kid, yeah, probably you know that it's just very hard to do. So you need kind of the willingness from the parties to actually take some part of ownership to this responsibility, to kind of feel align with these ethics, which are ill-defined, but whatever, we can still try. And the problem here is that usually in private companies and also in institutions, we try to be more and more objective. So we are actually driven by numbers. And so there are KPIs which are from various, short-term, mid-term, long-term, but even the longest-term KPIs, the key performance indicators, are still like on a 5 years basis. And they usually we don't get there, and they are pivot before that and everything. So all this quantitative way of conducting a business doesn't encode in any way any ethical way of acting. Usually they are driven by things which are measurable, and those things are usually about money, about money either in profit or maybe the cost of enforcing a regulation, or the cost of actually breaking the law, and maybe nobody will notice.
So where is the ethics lying?
So the ethics you might also push it to the practitioners, so the experts that actually implement the algorithms, but you will always find somebody that is willing to implement something that makes profit for their companies. So at the end, indeed, you get to the actual user, the society, the people. Basically, what I believe is that ethics basically is enforced by the people.
Enforced.
By their public opinion. And indeed, as mentioned here just before, there are lots of initiatives by big companies to try to mitigate their risk of losing their customers, because that's how they consider it, by trying to play the good guys. So, and indeed, there are lots of very promising technologies which have been proposed by Microsoft, Google, Amazon, or whatever. So that means they are basically driving a lot of innovation in terms of, well, things which consider ethical, like the privacy-preserving technologies, to just cite one. So these kind of initiatives come from the public opinion. And this public opinion comes from education. And I think that one way that, that beyond regulations, government maybe could also help is, I think I was a bit triggered by the discussion on standards, because indeed I see usually standards as a way to lower prices, especially for small companies. Big companies have enough means to actually develop their own standards, but if you want to be a small company and develop tools and you start from scratch, you will never get there. So if you don't have standards, you have nothing, and so you don't get there. So this fact that regulations and actions from government that are kind of trying to create homogeneity is hindering innovations. I think that there is a way that by working on platforms which help companies to establish the right standards and providing some tools and maybe some data platform. We talked about data access. There are some, and I know about physics project like Copernicus, where the government invests massive amount of money in collecting data and offering a platform. And to use it, of course, you have to follow certain standards. So to comply with it, the government is bringing you something which has value, so you use it and you comply with the standards because of that, and not only because you want to have access to the juicy European market. So this is something that I think is pretty promising, and maybe IP law also. This is something we.
So it seems like what responsibility is rather than asking to get the reward for the incentives that you had, you try to understand what are the compromises that every stakeholder has to make with themselves in order to...
It's a self-consistent system.
Yes, I understand. Great. So where is the role of the SMEs? He mentioned one, like in the standards, that's why it's good to have standards. Can you describe where is the role of the SMEs in this whole data-reliant platforms at the Assembly?
Yes, well, first of all, yes, we represent, as an organization, we represent SMEs in the ICT sector. And most of the companies that we represent, or many of them, are actually developing like software or tailored solutions for other SMEs. So if a local business wants to go online or develop their business model, they would turn to other SMEs that are in the ICT sector, and those companies would help them to go digital. And I think it's a fundamentally different type of business model, which is also why there's a difference there in the whole setup, in the whole economy that is relying on SMEs or larger platforms. So yeah, because the question here is like how do data-reliant platforms act responsibly, and Paulo already mentioned that their business model is completely different. And you can also see that in how they generate the revenue. Like in 2018, Facebook relied on advertisement for over 90% of their revenue, and Google or Alphabet for over 70%. So there's really, yeah, this high reliance on advertisement for revenue and for their business model. And I think this really fundamentally creates an environment that is completely different also in terms of, you know, acting responsibly. So that is one of the key issues here. And yeah, so I found your intervention also really interesting. At the same time, I agree also on that aspect that regulation is not everything, because at the EU level, you know, now there's this discussion about the Digital Services Act, which wants to upgrade liability and safety rules again in this environment. But at the same time, it's usually the big companies who are able to comply with those rules easily, and the small ones who are not. So if you regulate the problem, sometimes you also create hurdles for small companies. So this is one of the key problems, which is why your contributions in terms of thinking about what we can do are very important, because I think regulation is not, well, it can be an aspect, but it has to be done smartly. Otherwise, you create a monster that is actually going to do more harm.
Anyone with a question? Please just interrupt us whenever you have something to add, comment, or make a question. Yes?
Do you need microphone? Maybe not. I just, a question to Elizabeth, actually, I wonder, do you then agree that the GDPR is covering sufficiently micro-targeting in general, or needs some improvement, or needs some specific regulation for micro-targeting, or, you know, or what are the key problems? Because this was kind of academic overview of the issue, but I just wondering whether you agree with this policy solution, which is GDPR, versus micro-targeting, which is we have discussed earlier. So how do you see it actually?
So I think that GDPR contains main principles on micro-targeting. I think also that e-privacy, upcoming privacy will have an impact on micro-targeting. And I also think that in addition to the GDPR, it would be interesting to see further regulatory guidance, which is already there, but not from all DPAs, data protection authorities, and also I think enforcement could be something. So I think the whole data protection law is like layered not only within GDPR, but also with all the ecosystem of soft law and the upcoming e-privacy. I have a further remark. Chat later on on the discussion. I was thinking about what we shared before during the panel, and I think yes, I also have new experience as a lawyer, GDPR compliance lawyer, before joining the academia, and I do agree that sometimes the role of SMEs within regulation, it's a bit complicated. Because I've assisted multinationals on the one hand, and also SMEs on the other end for GDPR compliance, which was my expertise. And I saw that sometimes it was difficult to put in place technical and organizational measures as tailored to their economic system. So I agree with you that to a certain extent it's true that it's a difficult kind of balance, but sometimes regulation tries to also tackle this aspect. So for example, GDPR, when in Article 32 states that technical and organizational measures should put in place, it also states that should be compared to what is the state of the art and what also is compared on
I'm later with a question about aligning the case law with the regulation, and who can choose up first. But first, we'll take question.
Yeah, hi. I'm working for an MEP in the parliament, and well, I'm naturally super interested in any concrete proposals, like how should policymakers then tackle the issue of the business model that contributes to the dissemination of disinformation? And also in concrete terms, how can we do this regulation smartly so that, so what are the concrete ideas in order to...
That's something for you. And you had a question?
Yes, a question or a statement or a comment, because you mentioned GDPR as a good example that is a legislation thought to take into account the needs of also of the smaller companies. And this is partly true because there is this notion of basically the impact assessment. So you would apply the legislation depending on the type of company you are. And this is good. The problem with the GDPR is that exercise of implementing the law becomes itself very complex and costly, precisely because you don't have specific measures. It's not a standard that you say, I have to do A, B, C, D, or a list of things. It's something you have to devise, and it is different company to company. Mm-hmm. So is it a good example or a bad example?
Mm-hmm. There are methodologies for assessing, like in a form of checklist, how, what each of the companies satisfies from the GDPR.
So if you are a consultant and you are advising an SME that has a problem, you will tell them, look, it's easy. I will not charge you anything because here is a checklist.
Yeah.
Or will you say, look, it depends on your case. You have to tell me this, you have to tell me that, and then we have to do an assessment on your case. This is typically the answer we hear.
So is there a call for standardization?
I'm not saying there is an easy result, but I'm saying when we regulate, especially in the case of big platforms, if we want to address a problem which is generated by a handful of big platforms, why do we have to regulate everybody? And we don't specifically say we have a regulation that applies to certain companies.
Because no one is independent. Otherwise, you will find a hole in the loop. You have to address all of the players that are part of the issue.
Yeah, but if you don't provide a sandbox, a regulatory environment where companies that are small can try, experiment, and otherwise they will not even start, because if it is too complicated, then they will not even start, and you will be back to square zero, where you are only bound to have little competition, as it is nowadays, with a few handful of dominant platforms that are just not going to give a chance to anyone else, because they have put around themselves big fences. It's very difficult to compete against those companies.
So that also goes back to your question. So how do you align the regulation with the business model and still have the proper incentives for the business players to be in the game, including the platforms that are currently monopolies, let's say?
I mean, when we say that we need regulation, we need good regulation. We need good.
It's okay.
Yeah, we need good policy. That's by definition, and therefore it should apply only to those that is agreed. Obviously, there are different possibilities. But I want to go back the issue about the MP. And in our experience, it was very curious since a while, and we have received many invitations from many MP to discuss about this information on media literacy, and that was quite good. They are interested. And then I discovered that this traditional politician they are a bit scared of having lost their power towards citizens. So the scope of these meetings and hearings was, how does it work? Because I want to do it too. It is to say that the pragmatic answer to your question is, for instance, what I suggest to Paolo Cesarini this morning: organize a table, a round table, and you will have a lot of good common sense points to say, okay, you should do this and that. It's easy to be done in Brussels. But you have to have the integrity. Is before in the value that we were talking about ethics. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Who do you represent? What do you want to do with it? Are you working in a society? Is a society when we give, and stakeholders are part of a society, common rules, and we bind ourselves and we say, okay, we do follow those rules in the interest of everyone. Do you do that for them? And then I think that this is the direction we should go towards. And there is a lot to be done. Indeed, there are a lot of people that are in good faith, to say the least, even if they are working at I don't know, Google or Facebook, or they are conservative, left or right. The matter is to have an alliance of good people, wherever they are, whoever they represent. But obviously, and having is a vision of what we want to achieve. And what we want to achieve is to take care of the digital environment we are working in. We are inhabiting a new environment we were mentioning before. We should take care of it. The same way that Greta Thunberg is asking us to take care of this planet. We're spending most of our day online. Should we do something about it now? Because we seem that we are not addressing the issue. Yeah, GDPR is important. But one of the strategy of people, I've been in Brussels for 15 years, I think even more, is it is okay. In any case, we gain time, and they are discussing about the policy and these things. It will take 3 years. And then the researchers, they disagree each other, so what? There is nothing that we can do. And then they have limitless, resources, financial one, to pay your studies, to pay to sponsor your conference. How should we deal with that? The solution is breaking the monopoly, is working on free competition. That is another rule of Western society. Why don't we do that? Is Facebook should be split up? It's too big. It does this work against the rule of market and economy? It does not, because otherwise it's democracy that is broken.
Well, isn't that where smaller players come into the play, where maybe we don't break into Facebook, but we introduce new players that would be competitive? Or
yeah, perhaps actually I wanted to show something because, well, I don't have a presentation, but we have some. Thanks. Yeah, we have some ideas also on that we developed before the elections, and we have like some key points on how we envision actually what Europe should do in the digital field. It's split up in different points. Many points talk about innovation and basic infrastructure, but we also have one on the data economy, and actually it is a key point. I mean, now in Brussels there has been a lot of discussion about, you know, if data should be looked at more in terms of competition. Well, I mean, we also don't have the answer, but there could be, I think things could be better, or the internet or the future digital economy could be better if there was more competition, and if data was not monopolized, and if there was some way for smaller players to access data. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's about the business model question, basically. I think that if you look at the big players, they are seeing like way ahead to try to be able to adapt to any pressure they have from the market and actually pivot to other business models. So in particular, micro-targeting, you can also actually just rely on statistics and be of tremendous value for market use. So that means that you protect the privacy of individuals, but you still are able to report on the trends of society, which, I mean, again, it's okay, there will be various opinions, but it's a step in the right direction, I think, if really we consider that micro-targeting is a problem. Now, about competition, the thing is that, for instance, again, we see that there are a few actors which pop up which actually are trying to provide privacy to their customers, and that's an edge, a competitive edge. And then the big actors actually do research on it to try to provide the same feature, and they do it with way more resources, so they actually are able to go faster. So they kind of stifle innovation. Well, they kind of stifle competition by just being better. I mean, objectively better. So why would you actually go away from their service if they are better? I think that there is maybe some kind of a problem on IP law. I very briefly said that, but at the same time, when you look at what they do, lots of the ideas they actually put forward to go in that direction are published in scientific paper, and contrary to state-funded research, are often also open science, to the contrary of things published in Elsevier or other things like
that's
this.
changing now, sorry. But there is a requirement from the European Commission that everything is open source.
Yeah. Okay.
So everything is published.
So, but the point is, you still have the barrier of actually implementing the stuff. So this barrier to actually boost competition, you have to reduce this barrier. There is a problem of regulation, and again, I'm coming back with the point I already made, which is basically if you provide if you provide actually accelerators which go with the regulation, you are not only likely to improve the adoption of the regulation, but you're also going to help small companies.
I like your first point. It was something in the direction that we are not exhausting enough what we already have, but we want to have something more. It's like when you want to read a lot and you download 3 terabytes, but you haven't read a single book of what you've downloaded. So I like that one. Any question from the audience? Or I will ask you. It's just a joke. Okay?
Mikko, so I was just wondering that what do you think, or the panel thinks? I had a chance to participate in my data seminar. It's called the Human-Centric Data Economy, run by the Finnish presidency. And there, I think the movement's, let's say, first priority is to ensure data portability. And what could this do for the SMEs and all that? Because at the moment, competition case, and that's a one issue, but what would you need for that one? Because Europe is talking about technological sovereignty and this type of thing. So would the data portability be the first step? I don't know.
So that rings a bell on the GDPR because data portability is touched upon there, and then Annika on the aspect from the SMEs.
Yes. To be honest, the question was about the fact
the
that
data portability,
yeah.
Would that help us further with the giants, so to say, and the SMEs to the next level, so that, because the data is the oil, so to say, the classical thing, and the kind of change. So I mean, like a GSM number. So I mean, I don't feel like the operator, I changed the operator.
Because what I know is that, I mean,
Don't be scared. Okay, you just mentioned about the data, then the SME aspects.
So I was very happy when I saw it. Indeed, it opens. I was very positive about when I saw the fact that there's a portability things in GDPR. I think it can really help if there is an ecosystem building around that regulation. But still, you need the ecosystem, because if you don't have it, you will not have standards, and so you will not have adoption of a real frictionless movement and opening of possibilities. There is another problem, though, which on data portability doesn't help, is that if you talk about social networks, they are networks. So if you are the only one to migrate, it doesn't work. Telco operators try to use that also by rebating on people which are on the same network as you. But in social networks, it's much worse. So that is still a problem.
Yeah, I think actually in the website that I wanted to show in our priorities, we do talk about that as well, that we think that this would be an important aspect to have, interfaces where SMEs could access the data, and but also that actually people could have ownership over their data and could actually take it, so basically portability. But of course it's a bit abstract. I think it needs to also be, there has to be testing and there have to be use cases of that. Yeah, I think that's also important. It has to be evidence-based in a way, like there has to be some experimentation on that as well.
It seems like we are going back to standards again, because in order to get data portability, you have to have consistency between the place from where you want to move the data to the place where you want to move it. And for that, you again need standards.
There is another challenge here, which is security, the security aspects, obviously, because it's not only about opening data flows and everything. You have this personal data store, which is a concept in data privacy and data ownership of the actual owner of the data. And those technologies are pretty hard actually to make really foolproof, that you can share your data with different actors and revoke your permission on your data in a strictly secured way. This is very, very hard, and we see lots of data leakage when people actually have centralized databases. But if we start to have an open flow of data going from actors, to secure it will be even more complicated, because Yeah, obviously. I mean, making data transfer from company to company, you have one IT system with one security standards. I mean, some of them are common and some are actually custom. And then you have to transfer it to another scheme and everything. There are huge integration problems with that.
But is the option to basically say that you have your data either with a Facebook or with a Google? I mean, or then you have to be able to move with that one because it's your data. You have the right to your history, so to say, but where to move it?
I didn't get the point.
So, but I mean, did you see an option? I mean, if you don't do something like that, you are stuck with the situation, the current situation.
Yes, I think so.
Just let me be a little bit provocative to Annika. European Digital SME Alliance. Basically, this manifesto you presented to us, right? This is nice, but it's, I use your word, too abstract. I mean, we need some specific, and this is the call here from audience all the time, to members of European Parliament, to specific solution. Yeah, this one. I just scanned it, you know. It's very nice, but it's very abstract, you know. They do, basically you're saying, make perfect law, or good law, whatever, working law, but what does it mean? You know, what is behind? How should you do from your position, from your perspective? You know, like this was suggested, like portability. This is one great idea. Maybe there are challenges, as your colleague said. Okay, but in banking system it works, right? They transfer the data and money as well without your intervention. It's secure, but of course there are different platforms. But probably now they are manageable. That there can be. So if it works there, maybe it should work also in the digital world, in this kind of.
But banking is one context. Digital world is set of a lot of context, so it's not the same. Can you?
Yeah, well, our approach was to, you know, we don't have all the answers, obviously. We're a small business association, and as mentioned, it's also sometimes a matter of resources. Like, larger companies have many more resources to put thought into these things. But I think what is important is what Paolo mentioned earlier. It's to have an honest and like a debate that contributes to something positive, and that's what we wanted to do here. Like, we don't have all the answers. We just try to be like an honest broker of things that we believe can actually contribute to a positive result. And that's also the complexity of the reality. You don't, you actually need to have it involve a lot of stakeholders.
He's from SME, so...
If I may just complement what Annika rightly said, the point is showing that in this context, in this particular time frame, when we have this digital revolution, which is really rolling over ourselves, we have one strength in Europe, which is our own digital industry, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, which are a big and important strength, which we should look at as a possible solution for the issue. Now, obviously, these type of companies cannot be left alone. We have, for instance, we have a lot of other players in Europe. We have a strong academia. We have very clever policymakers. We are a community, and together we want to develop solutions. The objective of the paper was to, highlight what is the issue, what we can contribute to that issue. But obviously, the solutions, and I agree with you, they have to be specific, case by case, and we, perhaps all of us, should work together to develop them.
Absolutely, my multi-stakeholder debate is needed.
I'm afraid that I feel we are really very much like, a line of blind people, and with a very narrow vision, and we are just keeping falling. Yes,
Do you see my point?
It is, necessarily we need a vision, necessarily we need a strategy, necessarily we need the manifesto before, is to put the context, is on the field has to be fertile in order that the flowers will blossom. Otherwise, it will be a desert. Otherwise, we will go fast in the wrong direction. What for?
But what do you refer to specifically? On what are we
I refer to policy, to the fact that is I appreciate the need to be pragmatic, and to have an action plan, but this has to follow a vision and a manifesto, whichever is the kind of policy we are talking about. You cannot jump and want it, okay, which are the things that I have to do, the to-do list. Is because I cannot think because I don't have time to think. Come on, stop. Because this in itself is a revolutionary act. You have to stop. If we don't stop, we will not go in and do a number of things that could be improved. Let's be pragmatic. We cannot change the system. This system is good or bad, but it's the one that we are going to live in for the next decades. But there is a lot that we can improve with it.
So it looks like you are proposing that each of us should realize what is their own risk of being part of the problem.
Is what I'm saying is that yeah, obviously there is an individual is a part in which indeed we have to try our best to become better. Is a citizen more skillful and whatever else, but at the same time a responsibility cannot just be on the shoulders of parents, of citizens, or users, or consumers, more media literate, more skillful. Yes, fine, but there is a responsibility and a role that society and specifically is institution and policy have to play. This is their responsibility to which we can contribute, but they have a role, for instance, to be a bit more pragmatic in the distribution of the content. This is the source, and we can talk about algorithm. If you really think that you are the one that is choosing which is the movie that you are going to watch tonight on Netflix, oh, I mean, you are.
So now you're
You
talking
should
about free
question
will.
on your
Is there
own.
free will?
You should question your own thoughts. And on the other end of this communication model, there is the recipient of the source. But what we have to do is to act inter alia with the policy in the distribution of that content, and not just the content, but the nature of the content and so forth. Obviously, it's a complex issue that requires complex and related answer. But there is a solution, as for everything.
I mean, again, I just need to add something to what's already being discussed, because now, as I understood it, the session is about data economy, and in data economy, yeah, we focus again, go back to misinformation and all of that, where again, the giants such as Google and Facebook would be leading. But there is an additional issue in data economy, meaning that everything today, that we don't own our data, because I see laptops around and the phones, and they all operate now on clouds. Their operative systems are on clouds. They're not anymore, disk and then running. So even the new Windows is cloud, right? What that means, did anyone explain to people what that means? That means all your activity is actually on someone else's server. It's not on your computer really. So this is gigantic risk. The entire operational system of European Commission is on now, all data is on Microsoft Cloud. Do we think of this? Because this data is vulnerable. Why? Because previously, you want my data, you need to hack my computer, right? And even if you manage to hack it, you will hack my data, and that's it. But not of my neighbors. Now, if I crack your cloud, I have access to billions of identities, of activities.
Not necessarily, because encryption is a requirement, so it's not.
No. Data security is different thing. I'm just saying who owns this data, who gave the permission to them to move from one business model to another, where I don't own anymore my data. I never gave them permission. They still sell me the laptop.
No, you're not aware that you gave the permission.
No one is aware of this. You know, that this change happened. They introduced the clouds. No one explained the clouds to the general population, and basically, they still selling the laptops and stuff, which are now interfaces to something else. They are not your anymore. You know, it's basically a piece of plastic. So we are not discussing this, and this is the future problem. You know, this is the problem that waits down the road, and it derives from the same situation which we had with the Facebook, with the Google, with everything else. The clouds are next big thing where we all are going to get doomed.
So the thing is, honestly, I'm not 100% on how Microsoft does the encryption and everything. What I do know is that there are encryption schemes which are really made for giving the keys to individuals, and that the people hosting the data just can't access it. So, okay, so you can of course doubt it or not, but I mean, technically it's possible to a certain extent. Now, of course, that gives the responsibility to the user to secure his private keys, so that he is indeed the only one to be able to use them. I would argue that actually somebody that has a computer connected to internet is open to any hacking and massive hacking, because any software you run on your computer will have security holes. So if you're connected to the internet, you're part of the cloud. So it doesn't really make a big difference that it's running on your local hardware or in the cloud, because in the end it's connected, it has those software with loopholes and can be automatically hacked without requiring to be in a central closet basically. So okay, I'm not certain there is such a big gap between having it running on your computer and running in the cloud. Actually, when it's run on your computer, at least they don't pay the electricity bill. So they sometimes try to push more work on your device. I guess for saving electricity. But the point is, I agree with your concern, but I don't think it's a problem from the cloud. I think it's a problem of how who is responsible to manage encryption of all this data. And indeed, ownership is very important in that question, because it's not defined at the moment.
So should we redefine privacy to understand it in another sense when we talk about the digital environment? Is it not privacy as we know it for the traditional world?
Yeah, I see your concern about the fact that when you provide your personal data to a given controller, so a person that should define the modalities of the your personal data, then it's really complicated to understand what are the processors of these personal data. So again, I had the experience to consult many companies in the past, and I had also to write policy, previous policy, etc. And every time I had struggled to understand what was the vendor's chain of a given, let's say, multinational, because even internally a multinational, to understand where data flows are going, it's really complicated. And we had to put in place really challenging processes in order to understand vendors and IT vendors. So I agree with you that this is a concern. At the same time, I think there are many perspectives here, because on the one hand, there is the user, which of course has individual rights such as privacy, but I don't think he can own their data. I mean, I think it's a concept that is highly debated about how can you own a data. And on the other hand, I think it's important that the controller, so the person that processes the data and defines the modalities, is accountable. And how can we be accountable? Being accountable means also to choose the right IT vendors, like for example, ones that provide specific guarantees with security of processing. This is something also quietly required by the GDPR under Article 28, and to have contracts that establish specific modalities to secure and to have the processing of personal data in place that is compliant with the GDPR or privacy laws. To go back to the scope of our discussion, this is something that really applies also in the context of voters and online targeting, because here we have voters who are individuals, and then we have political parties, which normally have been defined as the controllers, and also we have many other stakeholders such as platforms, ad tech, advertisers, and all of these are a huge environment, and sometimes ad tech and persons that are there to provide advertising within platforms are increasing in numbers, and they have information about individuals that you cannot either expect that such kind of subject do have this information on your personal activities or whatever. That's why I was just to in the beginning I was proposing my interests on Facebook, or my profiling percentage on the ocean methodology, because it's something that really happened. Someone, I mean, of course, Cambridge Analytica, but of course, this data can be processed by processors. And if you read privacy policy, etc., this is not always very clear who are the processors, because GDPR requires that you can read recipients or category of recipients, meaning that, of course, if it's written category of recipients within a privacy policy, it means that I can say just, well, ad tech providers, but I don't know the extent and the scope of how much my data are in other places.
You had a question?
Yeah.
Do we have a mic?
I wanted to share a personal opinion back to the original question of the panel. My name is Gianfranco Cecconi. I lead 2 projects for the Commission, but I'm just speaking personal level here. So we discussed how platform can act responsibly, and we talked about regulation and self-regulation or self-guidance, but we did not talk about us as the product of these platforms in a way. I was in the UK at the time of the Brexit referendum, and for what happened, I don't blame Farage or the right-wing parties. I actually blame my people, the liberals and the foreigners, the ones who thought, oh, this will never happen, right? This is not important. I will vote for Brexit just for fun, or I will still not vote. If these people went home and discussed between them and say, actually, it is important that we vote, you know, don't know what's going to happen, we need to plan for what's worse. We can do the same here. So if we went home tonight and make a brief call to our grandma or sister or whatever and say, listen, I personally believe Facebook perhaps is not being that fair with your data. I suggest you leave at least for a while. This is something we can do while waiting for Europe or anybody else to do the regulation that we are missing. I don't think any of us wants an enlightened dictatorship from the EU. They will not move fast enough unless with those kind of premise. So the people who can move faster perhaps is us.
Okay, we need to wrap up the panel, but I think that one question that we didn't touch upon, and you mentioned in your presentation, is case law. And is case law catching up fastly enough with regulation, or maybe is case law dictating what kind of regulation should be put in place? How are these intertwined? Because we often say case law is not catching up, then regulation is not catching up with the problems of the technical platforms. Platforms are not catching up with the user requirements, and it's like chase between cats and mouse. Who is the cat? Who is the mouse? And where is the role of case law in this problem?
So, talking about case law, I think there are many things to mention.
2 minutes.
Yes, of course. I will make an example of the role of case law. For example, on the role of controllership of personal data. So as you may know, there has been a recent judgment on fashion ID case where the role of controllers has been quite redefined. So this is a quite clear example that, of course, we have GDPR, and this is a law. Of course, we have soft law, and we had, like, for example, Article 29 working party that provide a specific guidance of the notion of controller and processor. And then if you are a lawyer, you get mad because to understand the how and what of personal data processing is quite hard, and the guidance, I mean, are challenging sometimes. And then this new case law that actually redefined the notion of controllership. And so here we are actually now. Case law is something that really provides a significant input in the scene, and we are looking forward to see also what are the new developments on this. And also, yes, not only case law, but I think the role of national data protection authorities in defining and enforcing data protection requirements it's quite essential also to raise awareness within the environment and the stakeholders.
We did study on case law now in the project, and to me it feels like case law also helps us realize what is that we already have, because there at times we don't necessarily have to look for new things. There are some things that old laws provide for new situations that we encounter on the internet, and this is where case law is really providing input. Yeah. Okay, I would like to wrap up and thank you for being the greatest audience ever. Thank you for being the greatest panelists ever. Just conclude that it seems that each of us has their own responsibility, and that it is crucially important that we all realize what the risks for our own well-being are in the problem of disinformation, information disorder, or whatever thing bad we encounter on the internet, and then educating the other ones and influencing the other ones through positive examples. For additional remarks, we will read probably the report that Annika will prepare. For additional questions, you will chase us down the hall now and ask if there is anything that you are left with unanswered. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We better do this quickly. I hope it was understood at least that we all want to work together, that we as digital SME companies, the rest of the industry, the policymakers, the academia, I think we all have in our hands the task to think about how to address these issues. I'm glad to be part of this, that we are part of this compact consortium, which is made up with very, very good people, very good brains that really can contribute to the solutions. And with this, we look forward to see you at the next opportunity. Thank you very much.